Hello, everyone. On behalf of Chicago Booth, I'm thrilled to welcome you to our Global Economic Outlook 2026. I'm really grateful to all of you for taking this time to engage with the school. Booth, of course, has a long tradition of informing public discourse through platforms such as Economic Outlook, which began in 1954, as well as our Clark Center for Global Markets and our Chicago Booth Review publication. Economic Outlook is a forum for our path-breaking thought leaders to confront the future, evaluate emerging trends, and share insights that help reframe our understanding of the world to come. This is the last of three Economic Outlook events for 2026. We had two in the US last month, one in New York City, and our annual EO luncheon in Chicago, which drew over 500 alumni and friends here. We have a great program here. I want to thank our amazing panelists, Veronica Guerrieri, Chang-Tai Hsieh, and Luigi Zingales, for being here to share their insights related to trade challenges and political uncertainties and what lies ahead for the global economy. My thanks also to Romesh Vaitilingam of the Economic Observatory for joining us to moderate the panel. A special note, if you haven't already, please activate your account with Chicago Booth Connect, which is our new networking platform, which allows alumni to find and register for booth events, connect with fellow alumni around the world, and join communities for alumni with similar interests. And it's Chicago Booth Connect, and you can get the app at the Apple Store or on Google Play. So before looking ahead to 2026, I thought I'd share briefly just some highlights from the school in 2025. And last academic year was a big one. We started two new degree programs for the first time in 90 years, the Master in Management and the Asnes and Lou Master in Finance. This year, the programs have been, I think, incredibly successful. This year, we actually have a global track where 20 students are currently spending the winter quarter at our Rothman London campus. I think Chang-Tai is going to teach them this year, and Luigi is scheduled to teach them in 2027. So we're really excited about this. For the past couple of years, we've had record applications for the full-time MBA program. And I would say that program is pretty much at capacity. And we're relying on our joint degree programs to increase the number of students that we're able to take in. The MBA Masters in Computer Science degree has become our most sought-after joint degree, as well as our new MBA and MS in Applied Data Science, which we began a couple of years ago. That's been really popular as well. At the college, the undergrad, the business economics program we started back in 2018 has become incredibly successful. It's the most popular major now with nearly a 25% market share at this point. And this year, we've launched a new minor with the college in entrepreneurship and innovation. Again, the first time that Booth has been allowed to do this at the college level. At Booth itself, we have students with amazing interests, very diverse, and we have a lot of centers that support their students who want to take what you might consider a non-traditional path, whether it's venture capital, entrepreneurship, or social impact. Our healthcare initiative was recently named the Tolan Center for Healthcare in honor of our alum, Mary Tolan, who provided an endowment gift. And we also have an expanded curriculum now with an MBA concentration in healthcare. 6 years ago, we began our Center for Applied AI to help develop insights and tools to solve social and business problems using AI. That center has become incredibly, I think, popular as well. We have a new concentration in applied AI, as well as a new faculty group in applied AI, which I think is our first new faculty group in as far as anyone can remember. I think the last one maybe was behavioral science back in the 80s or 90s. We're also seeing a lot of interest in our two newest initiatives, the Family Office Initiative, which is run by John Heaton, and the Arts and Creative Enterprise Initiative, which is being co-run by Alex Emus and Canis Prendergast. And we have seed funding to move both of these forward. A couple of global notes. Amy Ward, who is the Rothman Professor in Operations Management, she is the faculty in residence at the Yuen campus in Hong Kong right now through mid-March, and she looks forward to engaging with alumni in the region. On February 25th, we'll have a flagship event in Hong Kong, which is the Social Impact Leadership Series Public Talk as part of the Hong Kong Jockey Club program that's being run through the Rastandi Center. On the 6th of March in Zurich, we'll host the Chicago Booth Business Forum, Private Equity Investing During Geopolitical Change, organized in partnership with our alumni engagement and our Swiss alumni volunteers. So leading this will be Professor Emanuele Colinelli, who is the Joseph Gidwitz Professor of Finance and Entrepreneurship, along with our alumni from Partners Group in Switzerland and Water Street Healthcare in Chicago. And this event is still open for registration. So with that, let me just go and introduce our amazing panelists today, starting with Veronica. Veronica Guerrieri is the Ronald Carson Distinguished Service Professor of Economics. She's also the Willard Graham Faculty Scholar at Chicago Booth. Veronica studies macroeconomics, labor and financial market frictions, search theory, dynamic contracting, and growth theory. Chang-Tai Hsieh is the Phyllis and Irwin Winklereed Distinguished Service Professor of Economics at Booth. Chang-Tai has done amazing stuff on growth and development in both the US and abroad. And finally, Luigi Zingales is the Robert McCormick Distinguished Service Professor of Entrepreneurship and Finance. And Luigi's interests span from corporate governance to financial development, political economy, and the economic effects of culture. And again, many thanks to Romesh Vaitilingam, our editor-in-chief of the editor-in-chief of Economic Observatory. Thanks again to everybody. And with that, Romesh, take it away.
Thanks, Madhav. Well, it's a pleasure to be back a year on from our last Global Economic Outlook discussion on online. A year ago, we were talking about, we were waiting with bated breath to see what the second Trump administration might bring. A lot has happened over the past year, to say the very least. And we've got a great panel, as Madhav said, to discuss that now. So the way we're going to do this is each of our panelists is going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll have a conversation, and I'll be drawing on the many, many questions that the audience here have kindly submitted in advance, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. But it's a huge agenda for the global economy. First of all, let me turn to Veronica. Veronica, could you give us an introductory overview, like a sort of global macroeconomy perspective on what's been happening over the past year and what you see coming up?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Romesh, and thanks a lot, Madhav, for the introduction. So, despite the recent events, the World Economic Outlook shows surprisingly resilience. For example, according to the IMF projections that came out in January, global GDP growth will be 3.3% in 2026 and 3.2% in 2027. And this is with a small upward revision compared to the projection that the IMF made in October. In the context of this general resilience, there is a lot of asymmetries among countries. So there are some upside surprises and some more downside surprises. For example, France has expanded, probably benefiting mostly by aerospace exports, while Japan has contracted mainly due to residential investment and exports. China has decelerated due to weak demand, especially in the housing sector, in part offset by the resilience of their exports. And Chang will talk more about that. Growth in the United States has accelerated to 4.3%, and this is despite the tariffs and the federal shutdown. Why is that? Mainly due to technology investment and expenditures, and technology has benefited also United Kingdom and Spain. So the question is why US tariffs, despite what most economists say and said, have not slowed growth down. And in my view, there are two reasons. First is that effective tariffs have been much smaller than statutory ones. For example, controls on export of semiconductors and rare earth material between China and the US have been imposed, and the associated tariffs have been reduced until November 2026. And tariffs on many agricultural products from all countries have been suspended. So there is a very nice study by my colleague Brent Neiman, together with Gita Gopinath at Harvard, that show that effective tariffs are roughly half of the statutory ones. So this is one reason. The second reason is that at the same time of the tariffs introduction, and despite the fact that tariffs may have slowed down aggregate demand, there has been the big boom in AI investment. And this not only has generated the growth in demand, even if part of that has been directed to imports, but it generated a generalized optimism that in general increase aggregate demand and spur growth. So now let me say something about inflation. At the same time, the IMF estimates are that headline inflation is going to decline to 4.1% in 2025 and 3.8% in 2026. Inflation is going to slow, these projections say the inflation is going to slow down more gradually in the United States, and the latest dates are that inflation in the US is still above target, around 2.7 in December, while in the euro area, inflation arrived below target to roughly 1.9 in December. So why in the US inflation is higher than Europe? Well, tariffs clearly played an important role here in keeping inflation above target, and there are still risks of delayed effects of tariffs that we might see in the future. So overall, the positive effects on the world outlook seems driven mostly by AI and AI investment and AI growth. And this has helped growth and maybe moderately also contain price growth. The question is all positive? And with AI, there are two main risks that I see. The first one is that the expectations about the AI-driven productivity gains are over-optimistic. And this is possibly generating a drop in real investment in high tech and a drastic correction of the AI firm stocks in the stock market valuations. And of course, this can have sizable effects on growth, given the disproportional size of investment in that sector. The other potential risk of AI is the effects on the labor market and the fact that this may generate a drop in labor income. But maybe we can talk about it later. The last thing I want to say is that these are all risks about AI, but these are all reasonable risks of any technological boom. What is more of a concern in my view is that the fact that trade relations are being used more and more as a source of leverage and coercion for all kinds of international negotiations. And while this is not entirely new, the Trump administration is changing drastically the role of the US as guarantor of a predictable international trading system. Luigi will talk more about the geopolitical risks. The only thing I want to say for now is that the fact that we do not see yet the cost of this in terms of a recession or immediate recession does not mean that there aren't going to be larger costs in terms of economic welfare in the medium run. I'm going to stop here for now and happy to go back to any of this.
Thanks, Veronica. That's a great introduction. Chang, can we turn to you now and perhaps give us a perspective on what's been happening in China recently, what the prospects are, and particularly on the complicated relationship between China and US and the impact that has on the world economy. You're on mute, Chang. You're on mute.
I don't think I'm on mute.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So this is the central fact about China, which is, on the one hand, if I think about the narrative in the US, it's that finally, after a long time, Chinese industrial policy has worked. That we see the dominance in EVs, we see the dominance in batteries, we see the dominance in solar panels, and more broadly, we sort of see the emergence of China across basically almost every single manufacturing sector, almost every single manufacturing. But this is the contradiction that if you look at the aggregate facts, there's never been a time when the aggregate Chinese economy is weaker. So I'll put it this way, that at the same time that it looks like China is gaining technological dominance in a variety of critical technologies, at the same time, TFP growth is basically down to zero. Which sort of you raise the question, how can you gain how is it possible that you gain technological leadership, but when you look at the aggregate data, TFP growth is zero because TFP is supposed to be the aggregate of of the improvement in technology of individual firms and individual sectors. Um, so that I think is the main fact in my mind on like how to think about what's going on in China now, and I suspect that the story is that yes, it is true that China has gained technological dominance, but the way that it's done it, that for those of you who follow China, that um, so here's my basic rule of thumb about China, that the Chinese Communist Party says lots of things, they issue lots of policies, and most of them, nothing ever happens of it. So I would say that I don't pay attention to most of these things. When I pay attention to things, it's when these policies take the form of what the Chinese call a campaign. A campaign in which every single organ of the party state apparatus mobilizes towards this goal. Maybe the clearest one that people are familiar with was the campaign for COVID zero. That the entire apparatus of the party mobilized to for the COVID zero campaign, and um, the other, I would say that there are two characteristics of these campaigns. One is that they almost that they mobilize, so they accomplish their goal. But the other part of the campaign is what you see is almost always you get excess. You get excess. That is, you accomplish the goal of the campaign to the detriment of everything else. Nothing else matters other than the campaign. And a big part of what I'm seeing in terms of this technological push is it has taken the form of a campaign, that is, by God, we're going to gain dominance in these critical technologies. It doesn't matter what the cost is. It doesn't matter what else goes by the side. And I think that this possibly explains these two facts that we are seeing, which is that which is the campaign to gain technological dominance, and that is accomplished, but everything else goes by the wayside. Uh, and that is, and it's that second piece which I think is explaining the essentially the zero TFP growth that we're seeing. That it's the consequences of the campaign and all the other sectors and all the other parts of the economy. Um, all right, so I'll end there about China, and I'm happy I have thoughts about sort of the other two pieces of what Veronica said, which is the the use of trade policy as a tool as a tool of coercion, and then how to think about the benefits. And I also think that the big risk in terms of the AI boom, because I mean, in terms of the economic outlook of the world, these are the three pieces that I would be paying attention to. China, AI, trade policy, and coercion.
Great, thank you, Charlie. Let's come back to all of those. Luigi, let's turn to you. As Veronica alerted us, you want to talk a little bit about geopolitics, geoeconomics, and give a perspective on that in these times.
Yes, with pleasure. What I want to focus, I think, is the speech that Canadian Prime Minister Carney gave at Davos, because I think it's really a very important speech. And I think behind the beautiful rhetoric, there is a very powerful message and also a clear strategy for the future that has very important policy implications, particularly economic policy implication. So Carney himself said that he's going to talk about a rupture in the world order, okay? But he went farther by saying that this is the end of a pleasant fiction. So you might have missed this because he started speaking in French, but then he continued to make sure that everybody understood. And he said, we knew that the story of the international rules-based order was partially false. And then say, in case you had any doubt, this fiction was useful and that this American hegemony had its advantages. Now, some American commentators accuse Carney of lack of courage because he used the term American hegemony and not Trump administration. I think they are completely wrong. First of all, Carney is a central banker who knows how to measure every word. So we need to weigh every word very carefully. And if he wanted to criticize just the Trump administration, he would have done so. Not only does Carney announce the end of a world order, but he also does it without idealizing it. In fact, he exposes its contradiction. He said it was partially false, was a fiction. And not coincidentally, he used a term that actually is coined by the Italian philosopher Gramsci to describe the national conflict, class conflict within a country. Now, in Gramsci, hegemony is the domination of a society by the ruling class, which manipulates beliefs, explanation, perception, and values so that its imposed worldview becomes the accepted, natural, or common sense norms. So Carney uses this in the international context. So if you translate that into the international context, this means that the American hegemony is the domination of the world by a ruling country, America, that, of course, manipulates the beliefs, explanation, perception, and values in order to impose its world order. This, according to Carney, is the world we live until 2025, is not what we're going to live in the future. Now, this is a ruthless analysis, an analysis that leaves no room for reconciliation with the hegemon power. And how can you go back to discuss the emperor's clothes after you shout to the world that the emperor is naked? Why did Carney, who is used to measure his words, choose to be so aggressive? So one interpretation is that he really wanted to alert the world about the risks that are coming. Now, who better to tell us what happened when an hegemon collapses than Gramsci himself? In 1930, in his prison notebooks, he has a passage that is very famous in which he says that if the ruling class has lost its consensus, then what is left is sheer domination by power. And this is a moment of a crisis. And he has this sentence: the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, in this in-between, a great variety of morbid phenomena appear. So this is very scary. This is a transition phase in which anything can happen. But I think that Carney is telling us more. I think that is saying that if Canada and the European nation, the other nation, want an alternative to a humiliating subjugation to the hegemon power, they need to form a coalition. Now, I don't know if you know, but in the world of bonobos, which is a big ape, females rule despite the fact that males are stronger. And the reason is that females are very good at forming coalitions and males are not. So what Canada trying to say is, if we want to maintain our independence, we need to form a coalition of middle powers. And the natural coalition for Canada is that with the European countries that are also threatened by the overreach of the Trump administration. Now, there is a little problem in forming a coalition, and is the following. Each potential member of this coalition will like to pretend to join in order to increase its outside option, but then in the last minute to compromise with the hegemon to extract a bigger surplus. So anticipating this risk, potential members don't trust each other, undermining any chance of a coalition forming. So the only way to create a coalition like this is to start to commit to burn the bridges behind you. I interpret this as the speech of Mark Carney. Mark Carney is burning the bridge in order to try to create a coalition with the Europeans. And then the big question for 2026 is, will they? Will they start to form a coalition, Canada and Europe, or not? And I think any economic policy is subordinated to this geopolitical perspective.
Thanks, Luigi. Veronica, maybe I can follow up on that with what you see happening in Europe. I mean, we already have, in a sense, a coalition with the European Union. Perhaps it's added to, as Luigi suggests, by Mark Carney's Canada. What's your perspective on what's happening in Europe in its position in the world that's changed so dramatically over the past year?
Yeah, I think that the recent agreement between Europe and India is a good signal or a good sign that there is some movement in the direction of creating some bilateral agreements in the direction of what Luigi was mentioning between Canada and Europe, for example. I think the future of Europe clearly depends on how they're gonna play out in this international context, and if they're gonna be able to maintain, and I think this is a real possibility, maintain a international trade system that works even without the US. I think that that's gonna be critical, and I think that's possible, and I think that there are some positive signs in this direction already.
Chang, I wonder what the Chinese perspective in Europe is. If you read The Economist, it's all very China just sees Europe as a ancient, aged museum, and which is China is winning effectively in all the critical industries that you were describing earlier. Is that correct? You're on mute again.
I think that's right. I think that is the Chinese perspective. I'm curious about, so I'm gonna just try to probe Luigi on whether he thinks that there will be a point where the key European countries are going to be willing to do a Mark Carney to burn the bridges. I don't see it yet. I don't see it yet that even with Greenland, there's still this, that combined with the outrage, there's also this thing, oh, we just got to talk some more with Trump. We got to talk some more with Trump, and then we can reason with him. Let's flatter him. Let's take him out for dinner. So I don't quite. I wonder what is it going to take for the British, the French, and the Germans? Like if think about to make the Mark Carney decision. And the other two parts of the world that I think are also thinking about this, the same thing, are the Koreans and the Koreans and the Japanese, which is that there's all this outrage. There's been this outrage, particularly in Korea in the last few months, about what the Trump administration is trying to do. I don't see them doing a Mark Carney, although there's a lot of discussion about I would say that there's a huge amount of frustration, there's a huge amount of anger, but at the end of the day, it's the fear of what is going to happen if the Americans pulled out the troops from South Korea. So
if I may respond, I think that I see a big difference between Korea and Japan on the one hand and Europe on the other. In the sense, Korea and Japan are directly threatened by Chinese potential expansionists. Europe is not. Europe, to some extent, is a natural ally of China. And if China was not a big supporter of Russia, they were the natural friend, right? Because the enemy of my enemies are my friend. And so standard geopolitics will say that Europe should integrate with China. And I think there are a lot of elements that make it easier, including the industrial component, an alliance between Europe and China. The fundamental problem is Europe is not a country, it's a continent. And the European Union is very fragmented. And Chang, you said correctly, let's not look at Europe, let's look at France and Germany. And I'm sorry, the UK now are really marginal. I look at Germany, and I think that Germany has a natural interest now in going down the path of Mark Carney. And this natural interest is that, unfortunately, the rearmament push is fantastic from an economic point of view. Germany has a manufacturing industry which is becoming obsolete thanks to the Chinese. So where they're going to put all that manufacturing capacity, if they were to destroy it, there would be enormous repercussion from a social point of view. And the natural thing to do is actually apply it to the defense industry. And so becoming the center of a resistance against Russia, the leader in Europe in that dimension, is both politically and economically very convenient for Germany. And I think Germany will do it.
Can I add something? So to follow up on Chang position and Luigi, I think the fragmentation of Europe is agree is a big problem, and especially because Europe has been very weak in many instances in showing a unified, strong reaction to Trump, and this while China did, and this actually ended up, in my view, in a situation where actually in the end. Even tariffs end up like worse for Europe than for China because there has been a lot of renegotiation with China, while Europe being so weak and so condescending has actually had worse repercussions in terms of negotiation. So, like display unified front is an important thing for Europe going forward.
Yeah, but honestly, Veronica, if we wait Europe to be unified in a decision, I think that even our grandchildren will become old. But I think that my claim is forget unification. I think that Germany will go ahead, and probably it depends on the election, but France finds it difficult to dissociate from Germany, and everybody else will do whatever. But I think is irrelevant in the sense if Germany and France decide something, I think that the continent will move in that direction.
That's
And
already some degree of unification. At least France and Germany.
Can we talk turn back to US policy a little bit more and get a sense from you all about what you think are the things that are really the ruptures, if you were to use Carney's word, and what are the things that might be passing? You know, if Trump were to disappear, you know, might things go back to how they were, or are we seeing really significant permanent changes here? Luigi,
I think that sorry, if Veronica, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, if I have to start, I mean, I agree with Kearney that this is a rupture. I don't think things are gonna go back to where they were. I think this is again. I think this is going to be very costly economically as a rupture because this is going to generate this again this idea of using trade is like as a leverage is going to generate a lot of duplications of effort, and this is going to generate like welfare losses. Like for example, like if the Europeans have to build a defense system, this may actually help increasing European GDP, but it's going to be a loss for European consumers. So it's not necessarily good, even if generates like a temporary, like a momentary boom. So I think this is I mean, this is the way we're gonna go. Like clearly, if there is a lot of fear of retaliation, and there is gonna be a tendency toward like creating your own technological progress, your own technological industry, your own defense system, your own sectors, and this is gonna be unfortunately the way we're gonna go. But I don't think we're gonna see some welfare cost pretty soon.
Luigi.
No, I completely agree that in this situation, you need to build the outside option. And this is, as Veronica said, might be good in the short term because your GDP grows, is not necessarily good globally in the long term because these outside options are not are redundant. However, I think that from the US perspective, the part that I would be most concerned is whether there is a big push in Europe to attract the so-called brain drain. And so we should not underestimate the fact that one of the big resources of the United States has been its ability to attract people from abroad. And this panel is evidence of that. And if the United States cannot do that anymore, and if Europe can get a lead in that, this can have really dramatic proportions. And I think that the moment Europe realizes that they need to build their own defense system, for example, in space, their own AI, their own everything, there will be massive amount of resources dedicated to R&D and university, especially in STEM. And so the attractiveness is going to be quite large. And I think that the future generations will not come to the United States, will go to Europe.
Chang, you talked about the importance of trade policy as coercion in this new world. Can you develop that idea a little bit more and what China's perspective is on that?
I mean, it's the idea. So I would say that maybe the best analogy is to just think back to the world of the 19th century, to the world of the 19th century in the period of empire. And if you think about what trade policy was like then, it was all about, let's say, the European powers extracting rents from its colonies, and I think that's the world there that I think is emerging now. The Chinese perspective on this was that this was the way they've always thought about trade, and I would say that the way I think about what their policy has been. So, one like a question that you can ask is, why would it ever make sense for you to subsidize your EVs if consumers in the rest of the world are the ones that gain from the cheap EVs, and your people are the ones that pay the price, right? So like just in terms of just basic economics, it doesn't make any sense. But I think the way the Chinese think about it is that they look at the world and they think that they feel that they're vulnerable geopolitically. They do not have the political and the military strength of the US. They do not have the allies of the US. So the way I think about what their strategy is almost the reverse of, I think, of what the US is trying to do. Like the way to think about what the US is trying to do is to use its political or to use its geopolitical might in order to extract economic rents. Like, South Korea makes that clear, which is that I always have I can threaten you with withdrawing the troops, and if you don't want me to withdraw the troops, hand me over $500 billion. That's, in a nutshell, what the strategy is. The way I think about what the Chinese have done is that they have flipped that. That is, they do not have the equivalent of the geopolitical threat. They don't have the allies. They don't have the military network. So what they're trying to do is that they're trying to use economic leverage in order to generate geopolitical strength, which is that I'm going to flood the world with my products. I'm going to make you dependent on my products, and then when the time comes, I'm going to use that to try to get you to do things that are consistent with my geopolitical goals. So it's still coercion. I mean, it's still coercion, but it goes the other way, right? So the way I think about the world now is that you have the two biggest countries of the world that are dedicated, fundamentally believe in the use of coercion, and then um, a coalition of the middle income countries is the way is obviously one way out. But as Luigi knows, that it's not a Nash equilibrium for any country to join the coalition. I mean that it's a standard Nash equilibrium problem, right? And I don't know how you solve it.
But if I
Thanks.
may, I agree with you, Chang, and that's the reason why I think you need a commitment strategy to solve it. But I think that your analogy, the analysis of China is very good and reminds me of competition among digital platforms. And when a digital platform trying to gains customers, they offer a lot of goodies to get you on the platform. Once you are in, they take advantage of you in every possible form or shape. So the United States is an entrenched platform with a lot of countries locked in. Think about the European countries have all their military designed for US technology. In a sense, the switching costs are gigantic. And so they're trying to take advantage of this. China, on the other hand, is the newcomer that tries to attract on the digital platform. So, of course, is going to use its economic might to be nice. Even Facebook, when was competing with MySpace, was nice. Then afterward, you get the real Facebook.
Can we turn to the impact of all this geopolitical, geoeconomic uncertainty on financial markets? We've had a lot of questions from the audience on the potential impacts on stock markets, bond markets, currency markets. Who wants to pick that up first? Luigi.
So I start by saying I think that the quick answer is instability. I am surprised myself of how stable markets have been so far. They seem to be anesthetized under a drug because if we know one thing as economists is uncertainty is bad for everything. And we cannot say there is not uncertainty in this moment. The uncertainty is very large. The only thing, and this is the interesting aspect, the only thing we know is that Trump is very sensitive to the stock market and is very quick about changing his policies in order to not destroy the stock market. So I think that the stock market lives under this illusion that this is going to be fine because we have a sugar daddy who is going to help us every time we're in trouble. I think that that's a very short-termist view because Trump is powerful and can do things in the short term to boost the stock market, but the damages he's doing long term are not easily fixable. And eventually, the long term is going to catch up with us. And so I think that the question is when, not if.
I want to add
Veronica.
something about the dollar in particular. We have seen signs of weakening, and is the dollar gonna weaken more? Like I've seen the price of gold going up. So the main reasons why I think the dollar is weakening are not tariffs, but they are first public debt growing a lot, and second, all the recent attacks to the independence of the Fed. And I think that's gonna be a problem going further for the stability of the financial system, for the stability of the dollar. Now, do I think that the dollar is gonna have trouble going forward? I'm not so concerned that a weaker dollar is gonna be a huge problem for the US because there is still appetite from emerging market and some structural forces that tend to desire safe stuff still exist. And it's true, maybe they're gonna go more towards European treasury debt, but I'm not so concerned that it's gonna be like the main problem for the US, but the financial system stability is gonna be more of a concern, and in that respect, the independence of the central bank is quite important because if there is a financial crisis and the Fed is not independent, quantitative easing measures are not going to be so effective anymore. And so this is going to be there is going to be lack of tools to face another a large financial crisis.
But honestly, this is the area where I can see the Europeans making more inroad because at the end of the day, everybody trusts the German to run a good monetary policy, and the central bank is located in Frankfurt for a reason. The European Central Bank. So I think that if there is an alliance with India and maybe even with China to make the euro the main mean of exchange, and also of clearing, in a sense, do you really want to clear stuff through the Federal Reserve when you are at the vagary of a Trump administration? I think that could be really game change.
I totally agree, but as you said for the union, I'm not sure I see very uh, like soon something like that happen. But yes, I think ideally that is the way to go for Europe and for the euro to be strong, and it's a good moment to exploit for the euro area.
Chang, do you want to come in on this, on something on the relationship between the global economy and financial markets?
Yeah, I'll pass.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Let's get back to AI, and because that's been quite a driver of the US stock market recently. And Veronica, you laid out some of the positives and some of the risks of that. Can we talk a little bit more about
I
that?
think, yeah, so I mean, the question is the questions are two. One is whether there has been over optimism about the impact of AI on the technological growth and growth in general. That I mean, I'm confident that AI is going to have positive effect on growth. It might be that they're going to be smaller than what expected, especially because when we think about projection, people often AI firms do not consider that there are complementary inputs in production. And so it might be that, you have some inputs that use a lot of AI and so they grow faster. But if there are no other inputs that are needed to produce complementary to those, if there is some sort of supply constraint on that side, then there is going to be a natural bound on how fast growth can go. Like, for example, like if you need to produce a software, somebody who make the algorithm work, but somebody create ideas, you can make the algorithm work as fast as you can. But if you don't have somebody create the idea of how create the algorithm, that is gonna be, slower than what AI could do. So this can be kind of a like down make the estimate a little bit lower than what they are. And second, it may be also that even if the effect of AI on growth is going to be large, maybe the competition may make AI cheap. And so the profits from AI, they're going to be smaller than what expected. So all these can generate over optimism, and I think there is a component of there is going to be a natural correction of the stock of some of the largest AI company. Is this going to be a problem? I mean, one thing that has become more like evident lately is that this AI company, and maybe Luigi has more to say on that, have a lot of debt, and these can create instability if there is going to be a stock market crash and a drop in investment in AI.
Romesh, can I add to that last point?
Please do.
Yeah, the company that I'm keeping my eyes on is OpenAI. That is, if I think about on the one hand, it's a great product. I mean, there's no question that it's a great product, and there are huge benefits that you get from the product. The question in my mind is not that, right? It's not that. But the question in my mind is, can you ever generate, is a product good enough to generate enough revenue so that you can cover all the money that is being spent? That is like, so I don't worry that much about a company like Meta and Amazon. Their balance sheet can handle it. But a company like OpenAI, this past year, they had revenues of $4 billion. They had expenses of $7 billion and no prospect of of that gap ever being bridged. Last year, they announced spending of $1 trillion. And the question is, is it even remotely plausible that you can generate enough revenue to cover the expenses that have already been undertaken and the projected expenses? So here's I'm going to stick my neck out that at some point they're going to go bankrupt. At some point they're going to go bankrupt, and the question is, who is going to pick up the tab? Uh, uh,
Yeah, first of all, I agree with my colleagues. I think that if we look at from an historical perspective, we know that every time there is a major technological breakthrough, from railways to electricity to the internet, we have the stock market getting overexcited, and then we have a correction. But the economic consequences long term are really very large. And I think that we are here once again in the same situation. I think that the economic effect of AI is going to be very large, and I'm happy to elaborate later. But from a financial perspective, I think that the risks that Chang is pointing out are real, and I actually point out to two things. First of all, OpenAI just announced that they're going to put advertising on the cheap version of ChatGPT. Sam Altman has said he will never go for it. So this is a pretty clear sign that they're quite desperate in trying to generate revenues. The second thing I will invite you to look at is that in this year, there would be, at least the prospect is to have massive IPOs. OpenAI wants to go public, Anthropic wants to go public, SpaceX wants to go public. So it announces as the biggest IPO market in a long, long time. And we know that the way bubble are burst is by increased supply. So all of a sudden, you're going to have a huge increase in supply, and you need to have a reallocation of portfolios, because at the moment, these entities are held by basically venture capital or private equity firms and so on and so forth. And these entities will be very eager to diversify the portfolio and dump on the public market. And the question is the public market going to adjust sort of so easily to this increase in supply? I think that one of these IPOs will launch and not have the return people expect. And this might be the moment when people start to shout that the emperor has no clothes.
And just you were going to elaborate, Luigi, a little bit on the economic effects being very positive of AI.
I didn't say positive. I said very large. Depends on where you are. I think that actually OpenAI is after us. The AI in general, and not OpenAI. AI is after us. In a sense, we already notice a softening in demand for our MBAs because AI is very good at substituting the role of a new entry-level job. So it's not very good at substituting people high up in the hierarchy, but it's very good at substituting those. And so the demand for our MBAs is already softer than used to be, and I anticipate will be even softer. And I pose a question. I don't necessarily have the answer, but is a worrisome question, because in many industries, think about investment banking, think about consulting, etc., we still have an old apprenticeship system in which you enter, you work very hard, but you learn a lot on the job, and you buy a ticket to become a partner in McKinsey, or a partner in an investment bank, or other things that make you very, very rich. Okay. However, there is a funnel that takes a lot of our MBAs and gives everybody a chance. Not everybody succeeds, but everybody has a chance. Now, imagine all of a sudden, ChatGPT or whatever AI you use substitutes for a lot of these entry-level jobs. So the funnel is broken. So the new generations don't have a way to learn. On the other hand, we still need some senior partner, but there is no funnel from the sort of masses to the top. And so my fear is that this will lead to even more a nepotist economy, because if you don't have a funnel, who are you going to bring up? You're going to bring up your kids or the friends of the family, the Nepo babies. You're not going to hire a massive amount of MBA. So this is bad for us and good for Kronos.
Okay, well, we've got on to the economic prospects for Chicago Booth there, but let's leave that on one side for now.
Let me say just one word
Sure,
of
go ahead,
optimism. I agree that the risks of AI on the labor market are real, and there is going to be many jobs. There are going to be many jobs that disappear, especially at the entry level. I hope, I mean, whenever we had big technological change, there has been a big restructuring of the labor market and of the organization of the firms. And so I hope that this is going to happen also in response to AI, and that we're going to find new ways to have still a meritocratic system to work. I agree that there are risks, but I mean, I think there are ways to use AI in a positive way, and I think that if we learn how to use it well, and maybe we will need some form of regulation for that, we could go to a new world with a new labor market, but not necessarily negative, so negative or nepotistic as
Yeah, so
Luigi
let me
prospect.
let me push back a bit on Luigi, that I could totally see that some companies could do this, but then I think about sort of what the market is going to do to these companies. Like, so companies in which that funnel is broken and in which there's no path, and then they revert to these other means, these companies are going to lose out in the market, because if I can think about some other companies are going to be able to solve the dynamic problem, which is that they don't think about just the present, but they think about the dynamic problem. Is that, yeah, it's true that my current crop of fresh MBAs are not as useful, but I still need it, because I need to think about the accumulation of talent within a company, and these are going to be the companies that are eventually going to win in the marketplace.
Sorry, Chang, I don't want to destroy your optimism, but if the real technical knowledge can be acquired very easily through AI, what are left are contacts. And so the companies will be very successful in the marketplace because they have the contacts with the Trump administration, and they have AI solving all the technical issues. So they have it both ways.
Right, but then the question is, who is going to be left making the key strategic decisions of the companies? That if they no longer have the talent, it seems that the risk of them of the senior leadership not being as talented and possibly making real blunders just increases.
Yeah,
Time will
but
Let's pass that. The audience is seeing what it's like over faculty coffee at Chicago Booth these days. We need to wrap up, but let me have a last round of questions, a last round of comments, very short comments, please. One of the questions that came in was, what might be a black swan event that is not being talked about right now? So at the beginning of the year, we didn't know that Venezuela and the Monroe Doctrine was going to be back. A couple of weeks later, we didn't know that Greenland and territorial acquisitions, Louisiana Purchase, were all going to be back. What would you quickly point to as something we might want to think about? Veronica, I think you have something on this.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, geopolitical risks are huge, but I think something that people have not talked about lately, and I think is still a very pressing problem, is the environmental risk. And so my concern is that there is going to be some like environmental disaster due to global warming that people have not been prepared to, and then we will start thinking more again about the green economy.
Excellent. That's a very good one. Thank you. Chang.
I'll pass on this one. I have nothing in mind.
Okay, no worries. Luigi, I'm sure you do.
I actually fear, I'm not sure it's a black swan, maybe it's a gray swan, but I think that the risk of some serious unrest in the United States, even some form of civil war is not to rule out, and this will have, of course, dramatic impact in the United States, but also around the world.
Super. We are spot on time. Thank you so much to my panel, Veronica Guerrieri, Chang-Tai Hsieh, and Luigi Zingales. Thank you very much for sending your questions in advance to all the audience out there. And we'll meet again in a year and see where we've got to. Take care, everyone. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ramesh. Bye.